Welcome to the debate. They say blood is thicker than water. They say you owe your parents everything. But what happens when the people who gave you life are the ones suffocating your soul? Tonight, we explore the ancient myth of Nezha and the horrifying psychological reality of having to tear yourself apart just to escape your own family.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is one of the most visceral, just unsettling allegories we have.
Absolutely.
And what makes it so resonant, I think, is that it strikes right at the biological imperative of attachment. We are looking at a story that forces us to question the very foundation of duty and, well, psychological survival.
Right. And to truly understand the gravity of this, we need to ground ourselves in the actual text. So we're drawing from the classic Chinese mythological epic, The Investiture of the Gods.
In it, we find Nezha, who is a boy deity caught in this impossible, catastrophic clash with his father, Li Jing. And we have to be fair to Li Jing here. He isn't just some, cartoon villain.
No, not at all.
Right. He is the military commander of Chentang Pass. And when Nezha accidentally kills the son of the Dragon King threatens to flood the entire region. He's going to drown all the citizens unless Li Jing sacrifices his own son.
Exactly. And that context is just so crucial because Li Jing is trapped by his own societal duty, right?
Yeah.
He is forced to choose between his child and his people. And, well, he chooses the people, demanding Nezha's life to appease the Dragon King.
And Nezha's response is really what bursts this entire psychological discussion. Crushed by the unbearable weight of filial piety, like the absolute unyielding authority of his father. Nezha makes a choice that is genuinely terrifying.
It really is.
He refuses to let his father kill him. Instead, he takes his own life. But he does it with extreme, deliberate symbolism. I mean, he literally cuts off his own flesh to return it to his mother, and he removes his bones to return them to his father.
God, it's so heavy.
It is. By completely destroying his physical body, Nezha violently severs his bloodline. He hands back the very biological components of his existence to liberate his soul from the debt of his birth.
Right. And it is that specific, horrific action, the complete physical and spiritual severing of the parental bond that has birthed what modern clinical psychologists call the Nezha Complex. It serves as the ultimate allegory for surviving a deeply enmeshed, toxic family dynamic. The kind of dynamic where the only way out is to essentially destroy the version of yourself that your parents built.
Which brings us to the core tension we really need to unpack today. Because we have to ask, does true psychological adulthood actually require this kind of devastating Nezha moment?
Right.
Or does this modern interpretation sort of inappropriately pathologize the basic social contract of filial piety? Because from my perspective, the traditionalist perspective, viewing the debt of birth as something inherently toxic is, well, it's a dangerous misread of the human condition.
How so, though?
Well, the family unit and the deeply ingrained expectation of loyalty to it is a necessary, stabilizing foundation. Family is sacred. Yes, we all have generational trauma, but you don't just cut off your parents. You owe them your life. Navigating the heavy burden of those expectations is just part of growing up. And honestly, this modern idea of violent rebellion often looks a lot like modern selfishness, disguised as therapy.
Oh, I fiercely push back against that. Because when I look at the clinical reality of this, I see something entirely different. Gratitude should never be a weaponized debt.
But is it weaponized or is it just reality?
It absolutely is weaponized when children are essentially treated as property, when they are burdened with an unpayable debt just for taking up space in the world, That isn't a social contract. It's an emotional hostage situation.
Okay, wait, hold on.
And severing that toxic umbilical cord isn't just some therapeutic buzzword, right? It is often the absolute only way for an individual to survive with their psyche intact. You have to destroy the obedient child they built to save the adult you need to become.
Wait, pause on that idea of the social contract for a second, because I think we need to clearly define what we mean by property here. I look at this modern trend of labeling every familial obligation as toxic possession, and it genuinely concerns me.
I wouldn't say every obligation.
But it feels like it, right? Yes, parents have expectations. They desire their children to contribute to the family's legacy or stability, or even, just to show up for holidays. That is the historical norm for human survival.
Sure, basic connection is normal.
Right. We are not designed to be free-floating atoms. So if we view every expectation placed on a child as treating them like property, aren't we just pathologizing the basic social contract? A structure needs load-bearing pillars, right? If you remove the expectation of gratitude, doesn't the entire family structure just collapse?
Well, it really depends on what the foundation of that structure is actually made of. We aren't talking about mild compromises here. We aren't talking about expecting a kid to do chores or wanting them home for Thanksgiving.
Okay.
We are talking about the mechanism of conditional love. Think about it like a ledger, right? In a healthy family, the ledger of giving and receiving is fluid. But in the dynamic the Nezha myth exposes, the ledger is rigged from day one.
Rigged how?
It's like being born with a mortgage you didn't sign for. And the interest rate is your autonomy. The parent essentially says, I gave you life, therefore you owe me your choices. You owe me your career, your identity.
But aren't you pathologizing the very nature of sacrifice there? Think about the parents who genuinely break their backs to give a child a better life.
I'm not denying their sacrifice.
Right, but think about a parent who immigrates, who works 3 manual labor jobs and suffers deeply. They push their child toward a prestigious, safe career. Medicine, engineering, because they know the terror of poverty.
Yes, absolutely.
They are trying to build a fortress of safety around their child. So to call that treating a child as property feels incredibly uncharitable. The child might feel burdened, sure, but the expectation of obedience isn't born of malice. It's born of a desperate desire for survival.
That is absolutely true, and honestly, it is a profound tragedy. But intentions do not negate impact.
Okay.
A cage built out of anxiety and protective love is still a cage. Let's look at the actual mechanism of trauma transfer here. What happens clinically is that the parent projects their unhealed trauma, their terror of poverty, their need for societal validation, straight onto the child. And at that point, the child ceases to be a separate human being and basically becomes the designated anxiety reducer for the parent.
Okay, I'm struggling to reconcile that term, designated anxiety reducer. Are you saying the child is just a tool?
Functionally, yes. And the neuroscience behind this is devastating. A child's brain is biologically wired to monitor their caregiver's emotional states for survival.
Right.
So if a parent's affection or approval withdraws every time the child shows independence, the child's nervous system registers that independence as a literal death threat.
Wow.
If you are listening to this right now, and you've ever felt that visceral, heart-pounding spike of panic over a passive-aggressive text message from your mother, or felt overwhelming guilt just for taking a vacation your parents couldn't afford, that is the mechanism. It is the biological imperative of attachment being weaponized. The parent is using the child's desperate need for love against them to enforce compliance.
Okay, well, if we take that exact mechanism, the biological terror of losing your family, then we have to look at the collateral damage of the cure you're proposing.
Fair enough.
Let's talk about the literal violence of the Nezha moment. Because Nezha doesn't just walk away, he tears the flesh from his bones.
He does.
In the psychological framework you're defending, the modern individual does this metaphorically, right? They go no contact, they block numbers, they declare the biological debt void, like canceling a subscription service.
It's not like canceling a subscription.
But it's treated that way sometimes, and look at what that does to a person. Nezha literally destroys his physical body. If you kill the version of yourself your parents built and accept the societal label of being ungrateful, aren't you leaving yourself fundamentally hollowed out and alienated?
You are hollowed out initially, yes, but you are hollowing out a rotten structure so that something genuine can take its place. The violence of Nezha's act is a direct reflection of how deeply entrenched the enmeshment is.
But does it have to be so absolute?
When a parent has wired your green to feel agonizing guilt every time you choose your own happiness, setting even a simple boundary feels like a violent act. The child feels like they are tearing out their own bones
because the parent has inextricably linked the child's identity to the parent's approval.
But at what cost? I mean, you are making yourself an orphan by choice.
Yes.
When someone performs this modern Nezha moment, they accept that label of being ungrateful. Culturally, historically, that is one of the most profound stigmas a person can carry. You lose your ancestry, your safety net, your roots.
It is an immense loss.
Right. It seems to me that modern therapy culture sometimes glosses over the immense trauma of this severance. Biologically, psychologically, you are cutting out a piece of your own heart. How does a person actually survive that severance?
It is agonizing. Modern clinical settings see this all the time. The grief of going no contact is often compared to mourning a death, except the person is still alive, living just a few towns over.
Exactly.
But you have to ask why the label of ungrateful is applied in the first place. In a toxic system, being called ungrateful usually just means you have stopped allowing yourself to be consumed.
I hear that, but I keep coming back to Li Jing, the father in the myth. He was facing the destruction of his entire city by the Dragon King.
True?
He didn't demand Nezha's life for fun. He did it because the collective survival demanded it. Doesn't that map perfectly onto the pressures families face? Sometimes the collective does require the individual to suppress their immediate desires.
Okay, but
Like I said earlier, a structure needs load-bearing pillars. If an entire generation decides that any familial pressure to conform or sacrifice is toxic, who carries the weight of the community?
That is a brilliant point about Li Jing. He really was trapped by the Dragon King. He was projecting the pressure of the ruling authority onto his son.
Right. But that is exactly the point. The load-bearing pillar you're describing shouldn't be built on the crushed dreams of a child. If the societal structure, the Dragon King in this analogy, requires a father to sacrifice his son's soul to maintain order, then the structure itself is tyrannical. Nezha realizes that he cannot negotiate with a system that views his existence as conditional. If you stay in that dynamic, if you keep your flesh and bones intact but hand your autonomy over to an absolute authority, you aren't really alive. You are just a meat suit for your parents' unfulfilled desires. That phrase, unfulfilled desires, I think this is where we hit the absolute emotional bedrock of this debate. We are talking about millions of adults walking around right now carrying the unbearable weight of their parents' expectations.
Yes, millions.
And I want to deeply acknowledge the profound tragedy of that. We see generations of people who are utterly exhausted. The child looks at the parent, sees decades of suffering, and feels an overwhelming, crushing obligation to make that suffering worth it.
It is heartbreaking because many parents, unconsciously, do not want independent children. They want obedient investments.
Obedient investments. That's a heavy way to put it.
But it's true. They demand the child pursue the medical degree or the law degree, and they demand it instead of letting a kid just stand on a stage and sing with all their heart, or move to a new city to pursue a life that brings them genuine joy. The parent essentially says, I paid for your college, so you owe me your weekends. I sacrificed my youth, so you owe me your future.
And the terror of that realization is paralyzing. Just imagine standing on that precipice. If you choose to individuate, if you choose your own soul, you have to look directly at the people who wiped your tears, who fed you, who perhaps literally starved to give you an education, and you must tell them, your sacrifice does not buy my obedience.
God.
Yeah.
That is a brutal, almost inhuman thing to have to say.
Exactly why the Nezha moment is the climax of the myth, because the parent forces the child's hand. When a family dynamic reaches that level of absolute toxicity, any attempt to simply draw a boundary is treated as an act of war.
Right, there's no middle ground.
Exactly. You cannot differentiate while remaining connected if the system demands your total enmeshment as the price of admission. Nezha doesn't negotiate because negotiation is impossible with someone who holds your biological debt over your head.
But doesn't the myth itself offer a slightly different resolution? After Nezha destroys his body, he doesn't just cease to exist. His master, Taiyi Zhenrian, reconstructs a new body for him out of lotus roots and leaves.
Yes, and that is the most beautiful clinical insight of the entire epic, the lotus root body. It represents the psychological rebirth that happens after the severance. He is given a body that owes absolutely no biological debt to Li Jing. He is reborn, completely autonomous. The obedient child must be destroyed so the autonomous adult can be built. You have to grieve the parents you deserved but never got. And you have to rebuild your identity from scratch, out of lotus roots, out of therapy, out of chosen family. It is an act of profound courage.
Well, as we draw this discussion to a close, I think it's important to look at what we've both laid out here today. I maintain my perspective that the burden of filial piety, while incredibly heavy, is the foundational fabric of human connection.
Right.
The debt of birth shapes our lives, and violently rejecting our origins risks leaving us spiritually fragmented. We are links in a generational chain, and learning to bear that friction without completely severing the bloodline is a critical part of the human experience.
And I stand by the reality that when the generational chain operates as a shackle, when parents weaponize gratitude to fulfill their own unlived lives, the severance is necessary.
Yeah.
Enduring the guilt, accepting that label of being ungrateful, and walking away from a rigged ledger is the absolute prerequisite for owning your own soul and stopping the cycle of generational trauma.
Despite the deep philosophical divide in how we view the solution, I know we both converge on the undeniable tragedy of the situation. The story of Nezha is not some triumphant, joyous victory lap. It is steeped in profound sorrow.
It really is. It reveals that for so many people, the very cost of existence is a crushing debt. There is no clean, painless escape from a toxic family. The journey to psychological adulthood is fraught with an unavoidable heavy guilt.
It is a process of deep grief. The mythology of Nezha offers profound, unresolved questions about the price of individual freedom. It forces us to ask what we owe to the past and what we owe to ourselves, acknowledging that sometimes satisfying one requires betraying the other. There is clearly so much more to explore in this material, and no simple answers to the pain of the human condition. Look at your own life. Are you living for yourself, or are you just paying off a debt of flesh that can never, ever be repaid?